Neil, I'm pumped to be chatting today. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, good to be back. I guess I was on for the summit. What was that? Like 2, 3 years ago.
Yes,
But that
late
was awesome.
2020.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yes,
you're one of my favorite people to talk to and hang out with on Twitter. So this is gonna be fun.
thank you, man. I appreciate the support. I I think like me, kind of you're someone with just too many interests. Like you could go to a party and probably like introduce yourself and say what you're working on and give like 15 different viable answers to different people. So like what on your plate right now has you most excited?
That's a tough question.
It
Could
doesn't
be
have to
the
be one
pod.
single answer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably a toss up between the podcasts. So I'm like, I feel like in the last 3 or 4 months, I've kind of gotten more, like reinvigorated, I should say, about the podcasts. Like I've just kind of reframed how I've thought about them. It's like, so for example, outside the system, and I think this is similar to what you're doing with this show. I'm using it as a vehicle to talk to people that I really want to talk to and hopefully spread their message to people who want to listen to that. But a lot of times like you follow certain people on Twitter or you read about certain things, that's like a one-way conversation. That somebody telling you watch a YouTube video, right? You're just listening to their thoughts. But I'm sure you have this experience. Sometimes you have your own questions that pop up and you're like, I really wish I could ask them, this or how this thing connects to that thing. And that was the motivation kind of between, starting outside the system. It's like, I already had a podcast, didn't need another one, but this one was essentially created I was getting really frustrated. Like it's really easy to get black-pilled, I think, with everything that's going on. And, especially you sit on reading stuff on Twitter, you're like,
You can define black pill.
yes, for people that don't know, basically, hopeless. Like things are going
Basically
down in
hopeless.
this. Yeah, things are going down. There's no way to fix it. Right. And like when you start digging into stuff, that's actually not true. There's a lot of people working on really cool things and solutions to a lot of the problems that we face. But I think what tends to get amplified on any social media platform, not to just pick on Twitter, but I think Twitter's the worst at this, is like the negative news. And it's like you look on Twitter, like everyone's getting murdered, everyone's dying of myocarditis, like everything is bad, right? And like that's actually not at all true. So I started looking into like people actually solving some of these problems, and this is before I started the podcast. And there were obviously a lot of people working really hard on really cool things, and we can talk about any of those things, but things in healthcare, things in food, things in media, even like we were talking about before we hit record about Fountain. There's a lot of like people working on good solutions, and so I just wanted to highlight that. That's number one, and then kind of tied with that is I wanted to talk to these people and kind of make myself more hopeful and be more exposed to the solutions to all of these problems. And, I think selfishly, and this is also applies to the audience, I think for the people who do listen to the show, the hope is that it inspires you to also go create solutions. Because we spend basically every episode, we spend some time on the problem and really defining it, and like, for people who aren't familiar with that particular problem, like explaining why the problem exists, what's stopping it from being solved, the incentive structures, like we get pretty deep. And then we talk about what the person is actually building to solve it. And I try to poke holes too in some of these, like and usually people who are building these outside the system type solutions have been forced to steelman their company, really strongly because, it's a non-traditional solution. It's not like they went and raise, millions of dollars because they're building like an e-commerce pet food site or something. Like it's usually something a little bit more difficult, and they're going against very entrenched interests. So outside the system has me really excited to answer your question. And then I have a company that's like a tech enabled service in the corporate innovation space called Xtivate, which I really like. So I used to do so I worked in corporate innovation years ago, did a lot of consulting work after I left, and kind of was like I was never thrilled about doing consulting work. Cause the idea of like selling hours, you can bill a high hourly rate, which is nice. And I think a little bit underrated, depending on who you're talking to. But I do think it's not like obviously a scalable thing. You're not building a company. You're just kind of doing mercenary projects. Super exciting. And so Xtivate is like essentially taking one of the types of services that I used to offer and essentially using a lot of digital leverage. So we use a lot of tools. We haven't really built a lot of custom software or any custom software yet, although we do have ideas. And then combining that with process. So basically process, digital leverage, and then really smart people who, for one reason or another, are not working a full-time job and need work that they can do on their own time at their own pace. So these are people who might be like super qualified, but are like stay-at-home moms, or like they went back to school and they're like looking for some side income, or a startup founder who's like previously worked in a company that's, similar to one of our clients, but is now building a company, but wants a few hours on the side to like make a little bit of cash so they don't have to pay themselves through their company. So there's like all these people out there who are really talented, but for one reason or another, not really in the traditional job market. And so that's kind of the third leg of what we do. So our product, to just kind of keep it kind of high level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our product is basically, so if you're a corporate innovation group who's interested in a new market or any market or technology, you kind of have a couple different options right now, excluding Xtivate. You have the ability to go research that market or learn more about the market yourself. That could be like Google deep dives, could be buying like Nielsen reports, could be like speaking to subject matter experts. That process usually, like, it's not like they're sitting around with idle time. So there might take 3 to 6 months for them to kind of go do that. The world's moving super fast. That's almost too long. Like, things would have shifted probably in those 3 to 6 months and your research is useless. Another option is go to a large consulting firm. So like Boston Consulting Group, McKinsey, Accenture, Deloitte also all have like similar offerings to help a company get up to speed. But again, it's a 3 to 6 month project. Not to mention getting the project, like selecting which company to use and all that. It's probably looking at more to like 3 to 9 months. And it's going to be very expensive. The other thing is the output format that they have, because all these companies have an hourly billing model. And their goal is to sell large projects after doing this research, right? The output of their research is always going to be like, there's a famous joke about McKinsey, like every McKinsey project ends with a recommendation to do another McKinsey project. It's just the nature of how they are, right? It's like these sort of like research projects are top of funnel for them to sell larger implementation projects or larger like business restructuring projects. So it's basically a sales tool for them that they get paid for. Yeah. And so those are kind of like the two options. And then the third option is kind of go hire an individual consultant, but it's like, how are you going to find that person?
Yeah, that's its own challenge.
That's
are they qualified? Do they know this market?
Right. And so that's also a really hard thing to do. So what we created is like an on-demand service. So people basically companies sign up for a subscription. They get a certain number of these deep dives every year, depending on what level of subscription they have. It could be 10, could be 20, 30, whatever. They prepay, or they're on some kind of like monthly, quarterly billing plan. We have a few different options. And then because they're already set up, they can come to us. We have an intake process, which is very asynchronous, actually. It's actually a Google form followed by a Loom video, typically for clarifying questions. And then kind of they come back to us with the answers. But basically 15 business days from start to finish.
Wow.
Like, we start the project after the intake is done. We have kind of a midpoint check-in, like 7-8 days in, where it's like, hey, here's what we found so far. Is this in line with what you were looking for? Basically they have a chance to pivot, right? If we're looking in the wrong, because sometimes there's stuff that like we might interpret one way, like it's a term.
The research
that
is
we
pretty
interpret.
open-ended.
It's pretty open-ended, and every project is different. And then on the others, like after the 8 days, the check-in, then we turn around a final report in the format of a PowerPoint or PDF, depending on whatever they want. Some companies are very anti-PowerPoint, some are pro-PowerPoint. And then the key part of all this is typically the reason why they're doing this is to either partner with, invest, or acquire a startup. So it's very much at this like corporate startup intersection, which is where my book was as well. And so basically the second part of the output is an Excel sheet that has essentially sorted the startup landscape for them. So it's kind of, we don't rank
like
recommendations. What is it?
Naming names, like.
Yes. Yeah. We give them in contact info and like if there's criteria that they care about. So like one example would be if, let's say I'm looking to make an investment, I obviously am not going to invest in a company my competitor is already invested in. So we sort through all of that. It's like, hey, like we'll highlight this one as red because yeah, it fits all of your criteria, but your direct competitor already invested. It's on the cap table. You're not going to want to do that. We don't make a recommendation though of saying like, this is the company you should go work with. We've been on the fence about that, but I view that more as consulting, and whereas we are like a research company. And I think to actually make that recommendation, you have to be more embedded. Like you have to know a lot more about the company that you're working with.
You probably want to interview some people, right?
Yeah.
You want to get on the phone with them. We'd want to take.
And we don't do any of that.
Several meetings. Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't do any of that. So I've never felt comfortable.
Right.
And it's less scalable because, you know, with what we do, it's like we surface a lot of data and then a human sorts through it. So one of these people that I was mentioning sorts through it and creates the output with some automations and stuff as well built into that. But to do what you're talking about, right? That's like phone calls and like scheduling and like that's a whole nother animal. I think if we ever got there, well, you know, maybe we would get there, but it's like, and we could probably charge a lot more for that. But it's not as scalable. Cause like right now, for example, we're working with like 12 enterprise customers. And we're probably at like 5 to 7 projects at a time. So it's moved pretty fast. I think if we got to 20 projects at a time, we'd be okay with our current process. I think if we got to 100, we'd be screwed. So it's always a matter of like, I feel like any of these businesses, it's always a matter of, like you kind of got to grow the demand and then you have to make your process match that. And then
being like an agency is itself a two-sided marketplace.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, those are the two things that have me most excited right now.
I love that. There's a lot of very evident excitement in that answer. I think one thing you can probably relate to as a podcast host yourself, what I try to do, my mark of a good interview is I try to show up with one question ready and just hope that question leads to enough of like conversation to just not need to look at the outline for the rest of the hour. I feel like I'm already at that point. I have several questions, of course. Like the purpose of the outline is if you hit a snag, you as the host just kind of like plug in another question, have a really abrupt changes the pace for everybody. It's like a good thing to do. But like best case scenario, completely unnecessary.
You don't need it. Yep.
I'm curious what your kind of specific personal goals are right now, because it's like, I think at this point in your career, you have tons of viable options, right? It's like you said, again, not thrilled about consulting, but I imagine with the amount of momentum and duration you've had, you could probably support yourself indefinitely just based on like word of mouth, inbound projects there. You have this agency that's, again, for lack of a better term, agency/tech product, marketplace scaling. Again, you have all this media. Like, what are you trying to achieve in the near term? Like, what's motivating all of the efforts into these different things right now? Like, what's the purpose? It's a very deep question. It doesn't have to be like super, super deep, but that's like something I'm genuinely curious about when you're like at a stage where you have a lot of choice in your career. You're self-employed. You've been self-employed for a long time. You have a ton of options. Like, why are you doing what you're doing?
Yeah. So on the Extivate front, I actually do really feel like the industry kind of sucks right now, in the sense that the way companies are solving this problem, like, cause I was in the space for a long time, both as a consultant and internal. Like I joined Estee Lauder in early 2015. So, you know, it's like 8 years ago that I've been close to the space. Then I wrote the book in 2018. Then was doing like a bunch of consulting work. And then Extivate was just like last year, like early last year or like late 2021 is when we started it. So it's like, I've seen a lot of different angles on this space. And it's like, I genuinely feel that our solution is what every company should be using in the space. And so it actually is very, very motivating when you get on a call with somebody and they're like, oh yeah, we use like BCG. And it's like, I want to take that customer from BCG. Like it's very much like a competitive thing right now. And it's also, the other thing is like, I've done a lot of self-employed work, for several years now, but I don't feel like I have it's not that I haven't accomplished anything, but it's like, I haven't owned a space in the way that like, I think Extivate can, right? Like, I think like, it would be very gratifying to grow Extivate as big as it can get. And I don't mean that big in the sense of like number of employees or anything like that. Like I don't really care about that. It's more like, I just want to work with every single large company out there. Like, it's just like that. That's kind of motivating me right now is like, let's make this, you know, as big as it can get. and kind of change how this work is done in this industry. Cause I think it's horribly inefficient right now. And it actually like destroys all the progress. Like a lot of companies have really great ideas because I can see all of these now because all the projects we're working on are kind of up, like they're not product launches yet. They're all just ideas. And they have actually all the ideas and some of them are really interesting and world changing actually. And then they just get mired in these endless consulting projects, to try to bring them to life. And it's just like, we don't need to be doing that. Like, how about we create an affordable, quick turnaround research process so you can actually start building and like doing stuff. And I think no code ties into a lot of this because the two roadblocks are basically what to do and then how to go test it. Right. And like the what to do part is what we're trying to solve right now. And then the how to go test it part, we haven't started touching yet, but I've seen some companies do a decent job at it. Like, for example, if it's a product company, like a CPG company or something, they could, in theory, do the same thing you and I would do if we're testing a new product idea. Like, go create a Shopify page, buy some ads, create some mock-ups. Yep. And I've seen more companies at least be open to that idea. Like, I would say 5 years ago, everyone was very against it. I think now I've actually seen a couple of companies try it. And so I think like
equivalency is just a wait list, right? Or something like that.
Exactly. But like get real market feedback, like not just kind of sit around in a conference room and be like, oh, this is a good idea. Or no, this isn't like you have no data. How are you making that decision? So I think changing the way that these large companies go about innovation is actually kind of motivating to me. Is that something I'm going to be working on in 20 years? Probably not. But I think like at this point of my life, it's super motivating to do that. And then I think the second thing is I'm always a little bit underemployed. Like I think Paul Millard talks about this stuff really, really well, of kind of keeping yourself a little underemployed to leave room for different opportunities. So there's a couple of things I've been, and these would be maybe more just like, I don't even know whether to call it consulting or like side gig or something like that, but, projects that are closer to like the outside the system work that I'm doing, in like food or in the healthcare space. So, we'll kind of see where some of those go, but that would be another thing that would be like really fun to go work on. Cause I do feel like from a mission standpoint, I think that stuff is so needed and there's not enough people working on it. And it's also, again, it's kind of goes back to like, I don't like how McKinsey and BCG and some of these other firms are doing it in the corporate innovation space. And it's motivating to compete against them. In the same way, it's like food and healthcare, like mainstream systems that are in place for that suck. It's like, I would love to compete against them and beat them.
Yeah. Do you have a relationship with Justin Mares? I know him and Nat, like, he's like the best. Like I've personally developed a lot of passion for like the things he talks about from reading his works. Like that's who comes to mind for me when you're talking about like broken health and food care systems, health and food care. But
it's it should be food care.
Honestly, it's like potential projects like, and that's like ecosystem. Like I think of him as like one of like the most articulate people on those problems, at least that I've encountered.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's great. I mean, there's a lot of great people, but yeah, he's definitely probably he's the best at like breaking down the concept, I think, in a digestible, understandable way. Yeah. And it's awesome. Like, yeah, so I've known Justin since I was a sophomore in college and he was a junior.
Did we went to school?
No, we went to neighboring colleges and then we were both working on, terrible business ideas in the same space. I was working on one that was like in the college recruiting space, and he was working on one that was like matching roommates to each other, and both of us were selling to colleges. And so somebody put us in touch, and we kind of became friends through that. But it's kind of funny. Is both of those ideas I don't think either of us would come close to working on anymore.
It's just, there's so many, rites of passage in the progression. And it's like the terrible app for college students or the app that helps you know which bars have the most activity, like all the classic ideas, or like the one that's
the other one's the t-shirt company, which I never did the t-shirt one, but yeah. Oh yeah, the laundry. That's another one. Although my brother my brother's rite of passage for this was a very similar idea to Instacart before Instacart existed. It's called Grocery
periodically
Buddy.
They are good.
Yeah, but he never really it never really got off the ground. But it was just kind of funny because like when Instacart got popular, he's like, wow, this is exactly what I was building.
And I have had like, I don't want to say this like, and I never know who's listening to the show, and I don't want to be discouraging of it. Like I've had several survivorship stories as well. Like Coursicle's is an app that helps college students get notified when a seat opens up at a class. So like you can be the first one to transfer out of the 8 a.m. when the 9 a.m. section opens.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's like a very like college student idea that like actually has been viable for a decade. We just had Brett Kopf, who's the founder of Remind 101, which is like, how lets teachers tell you when like assignments are due, like a notification app. So it's like, there's plenty of these things actually do survive. And it's like, again, the also like sub theme here is like, you and Justin have both gone on to like do successful things because of these experiences. So it's like, it's an important part of the progression.
Oh yeah. You should, I mean, you learn so much by doing that. Like you couldn't like so many things that you learn how to do as like enabling functions of any business idea is transferable. Like, yeah, there's some domain specific stuff that you're probably never going to use again, but most of the things like setting up a website, like how to drive traffic to it,
putting yourself out there, putting yourself out there. Yeah.
That's actually the hardest thing, I think. Getting over that fear of being embarrassed is not easy, but yeah, I think
social skills of entrepreneurship and like getting used to like getting like how to handle an email chain where it's like, hey, wanted to connect the dots between you and this person, like knowing how to like gracefully handle one of those situations. Like all of those like softer social skills are like arguably as important as like the website and the using Upwork and the like recruiting interns and all that stuff and finding the community centers.
And you're never going to learn that in school.
No.
Like those are not skills and I don't even know how they would teach that.
It's basically what's like, it's tough to be like, I think it's one thing a lot of like entrepreneurs think about is like, how do you teach this in school? And it's like, have a class where it's like, you need to go make money. It's like, okay, you all have a budget of $100 provided by the school, whatever. It's like, go turn 100 into 1,000. Like go drive for Uber. Then it's like, take 1,000, turn it into 10,000. And like, there's like some numbers you can play with it, but like you give them a series of ideas, right? It's like, go find the local businesses, go try to sell your top, like take people through the whole progression of like, go be a consultant, like go have a side hustle or like in the gig economy, use that to like go do some other thing, use that to go do some other thing. And then like, if you did it over the course of a year, you could probably get people like, okay, now use that money to like, I don't know. There's like ways to do it, but it's how do you tie a grade to like, did they make money? But I don't totally know.
It also doesn't have to be done in a college scenario. So there's probably like a rite of passage, like David Perel style school that someone could start that was about this. I don't know exactly how that worked, but it wouldn't cost what a college class costs necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you about this before we started, but the coaching program I'm in, I mean, I objectively spent infinite more money on it than I spent on school because I went to school for free.
Right.
So, and I spent $10,000 for like a year-long coaching program. And in my mind, I'm like, wow, it's like incredible the amount of value I'm getting from this program. There's like certain things where it's like you have to be pre-qualified in terms of like your business had to be doing a certain amount. Like they didn't want to take someone who's never made $1 on the internet and have them in this group. But like you had to have had at least a $10,000 a month for your agency before they accept you, which at least for the terms at the time. But like these, again, it's more of an apprenticeship model, right? It is just like, here's a bunch of guys who've taken agencies from 10K a month to 50K a month. If you're at 10K a month, we're going to help you get to 50K a month. Just like really specific apprenticeship.
Yep.
And in a group experience.
Yeah. So then you get the community as part of that too, which I think is important because it's like, yeah, somebody could say you can go do all this by yourself. Like, what's to stop you, I guess, from going and starting a company online? And there's no real gatekeeper. But I think having the other people to learn from is actually equally important as the actual, because there's a lot of things that you'll get stuck in by yourself, which actually other people have solved. Yep. And would just unblock you really, really easily.
Exactly. One of the ways I framed it, I'm like, okay, there's 20 6-month chunks of this decade of my 20s. And my framing was like, okay, I don't know if this is going to solve all of my problems, but I think it's going to accelerate whatever I do. They're not going to teach me anything I couldn't figure out because none of them are like objectively smarter than me or like roughly in the same bandwidth, right? Some of them definitely are smarter than me, but like, I don't like to, again, say people are smarter than me because it's like, then it becomes an excuse to not achieve what they've achieved.
Right.
Even if they are actually smarter than me, I'm not going to tell myself that. And point is, it's like, if $10,000, is that worth accelerating my timeline to success by 6 months? It's like, of course. And I think for so many of these things, it's again, all the rates. There's who was I listening to? I think it's Hormozy actually, who was saying that, entrepreneurship is like the best self-development tool in the world because it's just consistently like forcing you to like overcome ego and all of these things and just like realize that like forces you to be a good person because you realize you don't succeed long-term by not being a good person, like all of these positive character traits that get developed by it. But for me, it's like, and then also valuing your time, like recognizing the scarcity of time, great, like all of those things just kind of are downstream of like learning how to be effective as an entrepreneur operator.
And like creating value, like for somebody, right? It's like, why would they buy from you? Actually having somebody buy from you is like, it's fascinating in large companies. And this is probably true. This is probably even more true in people that don't work for companies, but work for other types of organizations. But it's so fascinating how many people in a large company have never actually talked to their target customer. It's just not something they do. Oh, I work in like product development. And it's like, okay, so how much time are you spending with like, or who is your target customer? I don't know. It's like whoever the brand wants us to make the product for. It's like, there's just like so many levels in the chain. And you never have that complete responsibility for the output. Whereas, yeah, as a founder, it's like, you have to be, especially an early stage founder. I think it's like changes as a company gets bigger probably, but, especially if you're trying to start something from scratch, like what we've been talking about here, you need to know customer, you need to know what goes into the product. Like you just have such ownership over everything, that is just like very hard to replicate that. And you level up on all these things, really fast, I think, as a founder.
Yeah. Another pattern that I was like heard from you and heard from Hormozy and observed in my own that like I'm trying to get out there too is like, there's a phase when I joined this business, Orbit, like doing the data and analytics consulting where my business partner was like, all right, go get more customers. And like, I found a couple customers to do this thing, go find more of them. And basically for several months, like we were not very successful in doing that. I was like, okay, new plan. We're just going to like find as many businesses who will let us like touch something in their business. Just like get behind the door and like do something and get involved. And from there, it's like, we'll discover actual problems in the same niche. So it's like doing several hours of like free work just so you can get behind the scenes of businesses in the same sphere, the same, again, no pun intended, but the same orbit of like topics. So we're like data, analytics, tech, like what are problems that this type of businesses face? So it's like, we have friends who run these businesses. I have friends who run e-commerce stores. I have friends with info products. I have friends with marketing agencies. Like, just like, let me help you with something. And there's like a counter advice that's like, you also need to like make suggestions in terms of like the types of things you might be able to help with.
Right.
Because it's like, you can't just like reach out to like a famous person and be like, hey, I'll work for you for free. Because then it's actually putting the burden on them to like come up with something free to do. Like that's not actually that helpful. But it's like, I'm really good at these things and anything vaguely related to software, anything vaguely related to data, anything vaguely related to analytics. If you need a dashboard, if there are numbers, like do any of these things strike a chord with you? And it's like, then just we got behind the door of like 5 businesses with like people I was acquainted with through the podcast. And we're just like, oh, this whole Google Analytics 4 thing's a big deal that no one knows how to handle. Oh, this whole Facebook conversion API, since iOS 14, ad attribution is a big thing no one knows how to handle. Let's just like start talking about those things. And of course, inevitably we ended up upselling the core thing we were trying to sell in the first place. But it was just about like the trust of, so fun lessons.
But it's also like something you realize when you start selling something is like the level of difficulty in creating a business is pretty high, so it forces you to improve your skills and like find all the, like these creative solutions. Like it's not as like one of the problems I think with school, and I don't know if we want to do a tangent here of like education, but it's very linear, right? So to your point of, you guys were trying some things for months, weren't getting anywhere with it. You have to go back to the drawing board. Like that is not the way a school lesson works, right? It's like school lesson is teacher taught you something. Here's some practice problems or an exam on that exact topic. Like you very rarely have this like iterative cycle that you're talking about here, where you try something for a while, you try everything, nothing works. then you have to kind of go back to the drawing board and start thinking really outside of the box to, and not to use a cliche, but just like to really get unstuck from where you were before. And it's like, to your point of what you just said, that story you just gave, like you ultimately kind of ended up selling the same thing you were selling. It's just, it went through this convoluted path, and you probably also got better at talking about it because now you're speaking the language of the customer, not just, how you would pitch it from the outside, but because you were involved in all these companies, you hear how they're talking about the problem. And then you can say it in a way that kind of resonates with them a lot more.
Exactly. And they're also just prerequisites for someone to be ready to accept that higher level thing from you. Right. So like that service is like requires a lot of trust that like we're saying we're going to become the source of truth for your business data. I don't really know if you're smart enough to do that, right? Like an actual objection. That maybe it's not verbalized, but like that's what's psychologically preventing them from wanting you to do that. So it's like no one's ready to hand that body of work over to us until they see that we're competent via having done something else successful for them before on a smaller scale. Or of course, separately, like an intro or referral. But like that's a cold start problem in and of itself, because then you have to have already done it successfully for a person who knows another person. But,
right. Yeah, no, that's such a good point. I mean, yeah, right now we're even at Xtivate, it's like largely getting most of our, so out of our 12, we probably got like 10 through referral or kind of like 1 degree removed from my network. So it's one of those two. And then the 2 came through, like, we didn't have any connection either through, one came through a partner, one came through cold email.
Your own outbound.
But it's like, what is it?
Your own outbound cold email?
Yeah, our own outbound. Yeah. That was also a fun process because I was actually convinced last year that this business cold email would not work for this business. So I like did a half-hearted experiment early on in the year. Didn't work. I was like, see, I knew it wouldn't work. And then so it confirmed my own bias. And then later on in the year, I think I was just like inspired by somebody on Twitter talking about selling to a big company using cold email. And I was like, man, maybe I'm like too biased against that working in this space. I should try again. So I gave myself like a couple sequences and I was like, I'm going to just do 2 separate 3 email sequences. And we've gotten one. This was in December. I did it like end of the year because sometimes people have leftover budget, that they need to spend and stuff. So, I mean, we didn't get anyone's leftover budget, but I got a bunch of responses from people, at that time of year. Cause I think maybe things were a little slower or whatever the reason was, it did resonate. I probably got like 20 responses on like a list that was not, so from a percentage basis, you're going to think it's shitty. I was surprised anyone responded at all, but it was probably like 800 to 900 emails were sent out, like, individual people. Yeah. 20 responses. I mean,
it's just about setting expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. I had higher, like I've done cold email.
Like 2 hours a week to build a list of 900 people. You know what I mean? And so,
well, it's so worth it.
Or when you had that completely outsourced.
It's so worth it. Like I outsourced that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had actually outsourced all of it besides the writing of the emails. I wrote the emails. But I outsourced the list building and, which I think that made sense to do because it wasn't worth, my time to do it. But it was like, so 20 responses. Of those 20, it was like 8 or 9 were like, thanks for sending this. We work with other companies on this exact thing, so we don't need your services. I responded to those, like, and we got some actual conversations with those companies. None of those have converted to customers, but they're all like, we have a few leads from that group. 11 I got on the phone with, and like 10 of them are probably like still in, or maybe not 10, but 8 out of those 11 are probably still in the pipeline. Like, because enterprise sales does take a while, right? It's like you get that one person on board. There's like 3 other people they need to get on board. Like it's never just like one guy unless you're really high up in the org. And even then, sometimes they have like other people they want to run stuff by. But so we haven't been paid by any of those 8. But one we just brought on last week. So it's like my bias against cold email. I could have been doing this like 9 months ago, 10 months ago. But I was sort of already biased that this channel wouldn't work. And I kind of, I think delayed doing it for way longer than I should have.
I could spend an entire another hour talking about cold email.
Yeah.
To bounce into a few topics, tell me about the Fount app and why you're so bullish on those guys.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I wouldn't even say I'm like bullish on them. I personally love what they're building though. I don't know enough to say I'm bullish or not because like I haven't. So on one hand, I personally love it as a podcaster and as a user. Like I think their listening app, and Oscar knows this. A lot of people tell him this. Their listening app could be a lot better, I think, and they actually are working on that, and hopefully it'll be better soon. But as a podcaster, the thing that's super cool is being able to get direct financial support. So it's less about the money; it's more about the signal from listeners. So I think actually, let me check live how many people have sent Bitcoin to the podcast, and I guess take a step back, huh?
The sat counter.
The sat, well, yeah, and I think it's less about the number of sats. It's more like how many listeners have taken the time to send something. Yeah. So 258 supporters have sent sats, and the total number of sats is only about like 37,000. So it's not like a ridiculous number of sats or anything.
Sat math. It was like $7. I don't know. That's off the top of my head.
No, it's not much. It's not much money. But the thing that's cool about it is just like, okay, this is we were talking about earlier. I don't know if we had hit record yet, but like, the number of followers or subscribers is really hard to figure out for podcasts. It's like, if somebody's given sats to my podcast, I'm pretty sure they're...
That's $100, $3,700, $120, just for the fact check.
Okay. It's not nothing. Yeah, and the thing that's cool about it is, Fountain is an enabler of this, but Fountain is actually not podcasting. It's not the only podcasting 2.0 player. So the way podcasts work, it's like an RSS feed, which is open. And when somebody says like, oh, this podcast got like Alex Jones podcast or something, right? Gets like removed. That's a platform blocking the RSS feed. The podcast still exists, actually. There's podcast players which don't don't censor.
It's the same fallacy as saying like Bitcoin got hacked. It's like,
yes, it's like Bitcoin did not get hacked. It's like the wallet might have gotten compromised.
Someone figured out your password to Coinbase, or it's like, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, it's not exactly right. So that's exactly the way to think about it. So it's like, podcasting is an open protocol. Podcasting 2.0, which is what Fountain uses to do these donations, is also an open protocol. And Fountain is just a platform that uses that protocol. If that makes sense. So Fountain isn't the one. All this is not taking place on Fountain. So Fountain, and I get a question sometimes of like, what's the difference between like Fountain and Patreon? That's like, there's similarities for sure.
On what level do you want me to answer the question? Right.
Yeah. It's like you're financially supporting a creator. That's true on both platforms. Fountain, you can do some cool things. Like you can stream people sats per minute. Like I can say, I'm going to give 10 sats per minute of listening. So then if I like only listen to 7 minutes of a podcast, they'll only get 70 sats. If I listen to the whole, 100 minutes, they'll get more. So that's like one way to do it. You can do a boost, which is like a tip. I just think what's really cool about it is like, it's like permissionless. So I'm not like beholden to a platform. It's a way to get direct financial support. It's a really good signal. So in their app, even you can look in the home, tab, and you'll see like the donations that people you follow, or not donations, but boosts or streams that people you follow are giving to different episodes. And that can influence which episodes you choose to listen to. Like,
oh, that's cool.
Because we all follow more podcasts than we can possibly listen to every single episode. And so, like I love Citadel Dispatch from Matt Odell, but I don't listen to every episode. Each episode's like 2 hours long. Like I pick and choose, and I'll just look in Fountain sometimes and be like,
reach out to Odell. I got so many old Bitcoin magazine guys I'm trying to get on the show eventually.
Dude, he's awesome. I love what he's doing with Citadel Dispatch, but I don't listen to every episode, but I can see like, oh, this episode got boosted, 7 million sats. This episode got boosted 2 million sats. So I'm like, okay, there's probably more signal in the 7 million one. And it's not always true, right? Like some episodes just become underrated.
What's it called? Unusual Whale, right? Unusual Whales. Just some guy just felt like Odell just needed some sats that day. But,
dude, you'll see some big donations sometimes in Fountain, because a lot of it's, I think it's a setting, but you can make it like, you can set a username and make it public, like, and kind of get like followers and stuff on there too. So you can see like some people, like I think the biggest one I saw was maybe one whole Bitcoin. Some big guy. But it was like, that was like Adam Curry, I think. Like, so Adam Curry is, are you familiar with him?
Godfather of podcasting, he calls himself.
Yeah, of podcasting and of podcasting 2.0. And I think he's actually an investor in Fountain. Like, I think so. I think I saw a panel of him at the Bitcoin conference last year with like him and the Fountain guy. Yeah. So I think there's some connection. But his podcast is always like the top boosted podcast on Fountain. Yeah, that's kind of why I'm bullish on it, is just like, direct way to connect with the audience, not a platform that you need permission from. It's just from that perspective, it's awesome. And then of course it uses Bitcoin, not some shitcoin. So it's like just much better from that perspective.
The degree of like awareness that you as a podcast host should have with the listener is something like I don't know what the right answer to is, but just like a Satoshi is a like subunit of a Bitcoin for people who don't know. So like a penny is a fraction of a dollar. A Satoshi is a fraction of a Bitcoin. A Bitcoin is 100 million. Satoshi is, I believe. So, right? 100,
yeah,
or is it 1 million? I don't know.
No, there's 100. I think there's 100 million sats in a
per
10 million. Hold on. We're being really dumb right now.
Yeah. How many Satoshi per Bitcoin?
Might be 10 million.
100 million. Okay.
100 million. Okay. Yeah.
I've unembarrassed myself by getting it right, but I've embarrassed myself by doubting that I'm right.
Yeah.
So,
what I was gonna say is the other.
That's a very audible sigh.
The other valuable thing about Fountain and Podcasting 2.0, which I think is like a broader topic, is creating a Bitcoin circular economy. I think is very important, and to me, it's like one of the biggest holes in like so. I obviously am a Bitcoiner. I love Bitcoin. I'm a big fan of it. But the thing that I like when I try to poke holes in it, the thing that I so far think has not been answered properly is like, let's say all the on and off ramps get cut off. How does this actually become a usable currency outside of like a few small use cases? And I think like one of those things that is cool about Podcasting 2.0 is like you can actually support your favorite podcaster in this currency now. And not need dollars in like the way that Patreon is. And this can't be shut off, right? If we think about censorship resistance, that's really important. And so it's like, because I'll tell you from my perspective, when I get sats through Fountain, I have a Lightning wallet on Fountain. Obviously, I have another Lightning wallet that I can send sats to. Occasionally, I've taken sats off the platform, but largely I'm keeping them on the platform and using them to support other podcasters. And so it's like, it really becomes like a virtuous cycle in that way. Where it's like people are sending me sats, I'm sending it to other podcasters, and like we're just kind of creating this like creator or this content economy. And I hope to see that in more places. Actually, I think I don't know enough about Nostr, but I've played around with it and like seen enough to be like, okay, this is another cool use case and way to kind of create this internal like parallel economy almost to the dollar economy.
It's fascinating stuff. I've definitely been all in on the Blinder stage. It's kind of been my like go-to answer to all things. I'm like actually seeing growth in the things I'm focusing on because I'm focusing on them at the exclusion of everything else. So I'm like,
which is good. I think it's actually really smart for your project.
Like, I'm sure Noster's awesome. I'm not sure it's awesome. I'm sure it's interesting at the very least. But it's something it's like haven't gone any further than that. I don't know if you follow Nick Catmine on Twitter. He's
I think he's on one of the lists that I have. Yeah.
Okay. He's the guy who like is the big brain behind the Bitcoin magazine. Like he's the meme god behind the magazine. And I see him talk about Nostr. And that's about it.
Yeah.
That kid's understand. We were talking earlier about like how do you train someone to like write good content and like write good copy? Like it's all the same. It's all like, does this person understand memes? Do they understand like virality? And like again, I'm only so qualified to like even to ask these questions because the results I have to speak to are like still very modest. But he's like the guy. I should ask him. I'm like, how did you learn? Because he's so good. He's the guy who took Bitcoin Magazine's Twitter account from like 400K to 3 million in like 2 years.
Oh wow!
So he's like the meme god and just understands. He's got the pulse, the finger on the pulse.
Well, that's part of it, right? It's like understanding what your audience will understand and care about. And then also doing it in like, I feel like so much of this stuff is like entertainment, but entertainment is like the Trojan horse. Well, no, but also like entertainment is like the Trojan horse, right? It's like,
or like Cito Disrespecter.
Yeah, like Bitcoin Magazine, for example, right? Is like if he's using memes and like cool tweets and stuff to try to grow it, and obviously he's been very successful at it. He's probably reached a lot more people about Bitcoin than like somebody just writing like a long thread about like how Bitcoin works and like why sound money is important. Like it's so interesting.
Like,
how, like
do you know Neil
memes are-
Soni or whatever his name is?
Yes, I've seen him. I mean, I
Like,
don't know.
he's
him,
phenomenal. His content's
yeah.
phenomenal, but it's like a tenth of the distribution because he's just always serious. I've never seen any non-serious
Exactly.
content from him.
Exactly.
He's like one of like the 5 people I've given money to on Gumroad,
wow.
but his content's really
Yeah.
good.
It's just that, but he won't have the same
just-
reach as somebody with a funny meme.
Exactly. One question I have for you in terms of, I've heard you say before that like you really like making intros. Like we've talked a lot about like getting, warm leads and referrals and like how important that is to everything and how things just come your way. And like you kind of said that deterministically, some of the way you do that is by making introductions. Do you have a formal process for doing that? I know this is someone else who like came to mind earlier. I know we both have interviewed Jacob Greenfeld, and like this is a point I wanted to make earlier. That's like what's interesting about him is like we both interviewed him before he started his current thing, which is like taking off.
Yeah.
Which is like the outsourced B2B lead gen business, which is like the building lists and the things like that. So like that was like a tie-in that was in my head at some point earlier. So I made mention of it. But he's got like this whole German style CRM. I call it German style because like in my head, Germans are very planner system oriented.
I don't think it's wrong.
It's not. I've worked for a German company before. It's just the objective reality. So he's got this very German systematized CRM of like keeping up with all his personal contacts. Do you have like a system for making introductions? Do you try to do like one a week, or it's just like as it happens, you're just like in the shower and you're like, Lewis and Bob, boom, get out of the shower, Lewis, Bob.
It's serendipitous. No, it's serendipitous for sure. I think that's like, I've never had like a system around it, but I feel like I talk to a lot of people in general. And so it just happens, right? It's like, oh yeah, this person mentioned something. I'm like, okay, you should talk to this person. I also have, it's weird. I feel like I have there's like a barbell memory. Like I have a very bad memory for some things and I have a very good
like that
memory
term
for other things. Yeah.
We're using that one. We're using that one,
barbell memory. Yeah.
That'll
like
come back up in the future, guys. Stay tuned.
Yeah, like even when I was a kid, for example, like I was really bad at remembering like facts from a class, but I could remember, like I was really into football as a kid, and I could like remember like every quarterback's touchdowns by season. I'll be like, oh no, in 95 he threw 37 touchdowns, not 36. Yeah. Like, yeah, it's like I would remember random shit like that, but not like what I learned in class the day before. So yeah, I mean, not that I was a bad student, but just like remembering the school stuff was a lot harder. So I think for the intros, it's the same kind of way. It's like, I might have talked to somebody 9 months ago and I'm having a conversation with you and you say something that like reminds me of that person. And I'm like, oh yeah, you guys need to talk. And then that, like, I just don't forget those kinds of things, I feel like. So I don't have a system, to your point. I don't have like, oh, I'm going to do one intro a week. Like, I think it's very serendipitous. It's like the weeks that I talk to more people, I do more intros. The weeks I have more heads down, I don't end up doing that many intros. But I think the other thing with intros, just to make a point of this, is you don't do them with the intention of like something happening for you. Like, it's not about like, oh, if I do an intro for this person, like they'll do an intro for me. It's like, that's not really what it's about. It's just like, it's nice to have, like, one, I like people that I like to know each other. Like, I think that's
super convenient.
It's super convenient. And it's like, hey, you already know this person. It's just like nice for that to be the case. And then the other thing is just, if you help somebody, like I just, the whole pay it forward idea. I think if you're helping somebody solve a problem, like they may never help you, but it's just good karma. So it's like, if you have, a way to help solve their problem by making an intro for them, why not? Like, it takes a minute. I have gotten better over the years, though, of asking people to send me blurbs and stuff. Whereas before I would come up with it and then I would like find that I'm doing a bad job of it because obviously I don't know their company as well as they do.
Sure.
So I'll just be like, let's say I was going to make an intro for you right now. I'd be like, hey, just send me like 2 sentences that I can forward to this person to get their opt-in. Oh yeah, always do double opt-ins. That's, unless it's like so clear that like if I talked to somebody yesterday and then you were like, oh yeah, I offer this service. Like somebody was like, I'm really trying to figure out how to put a dashboard together.
Yeah.
And like,
well, like a lead is different than an intro.
Yes.
Like that's a good, good job to the language for like 2 different words, 2 different circumstances. But when it's like, point. I don't know if there's an outcome here. Like there might be an outcome, there might not be. You just should know each other.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Like those are, I do try to do a double opt-in though, because I have found like sometimes people don't want them, or, or maybe there's some other reason that, their head's down and there's like, I'm not having these conversations right now. Maybe let's think about this in 2 months or something. Like that's fine. But I try not to like piss people off with doing the no double introduction. Because I don't know. I don't get annoyed when people do that for me usually, unless it's like a sales no opt-in email, then it's very annoying. But yeah, otherwise, if it's just like, hey, you guys should know each other, I don't require a double intro for myself.
Yeah. How are we doing on time?
Probably another like 7-8 minutes.
Okay. Amazing. I had a point in trying to remember about that. Oh, so I keep talking about Cold Email Wizard. I think it's just good to have like one kind of primary mentor at a time. I don't think that's like worth digging into too much and like actually battle testing that theory. But it is good to like be paying attention to fewer people out at one point in time. So you can just be like, this guy has a result I want to have. I'm just going to like go all in on that until I have that result. And then it comes, then like once you get it, it's like, we'll got you here, we'll get you there type thing. So like then you like move on and pick a new guy. But for now, I'm like in the phase of like, he's ahead of me. I want to indoctrinate myself in his worldview until I get to where he is. And one thing he always talks about, so kind of like the flip side of intros is, again, you're not deterministically trying to make good things happen to you. In terms of like, or at least on the one-to-one base, right? I think it is fair to say, I'm going to connect 100 people with not the expectation and not with the implication, but realistically, the probabilities are like 1 to 2 of them at minimum are going to end up feeling in some way that they might want to do something for me in the future. Like, I think that's not like a psychopathic, manipulative opinion to hold. And it's non-specific as to who of those are. But also, it is good to have like, and I'm completely okay if 0 out of 100 also make any effort to return the favor. Like, I think that's also an important quality. But on the flip side, the way to make it worthwhile is something he talks about. Like, so there's this part of the program called like the sprint, which is like, Tim's basically saying like, blitz every social channel every day for Q1, just every single one. And back in terms of like sales cycles and in terms of like conversion windows, it's like you just need to exist in the mind of people who can do good things for you all of the time. Like you just need to consistently stay top of mind. And it's not in like a berating way, but like, I don't know if you follow Nick Gray from the 2-Hour Cocktail Party. He has his weekly
I saw you
newsletter.
talk to him.
Yeah, he was great.
Yeah.
Got like 3 paperbacks and he to distribute to people who will likely host parties. Shout out.
Yeah, I bought his book too. I haven't actually read it yet.
Phenomenal. Worthwhile.
Bought his book. Yeah.
That book is really good. I'm a fan. And did a lot of good things in my life. Shout out Nick. But it's like, do you have for you, for example, it's like, you talk about how you got all these inbound referrals over the years. And like part of that is like, I'm sure you did, over delivered for your clients and did great work. But also like, I imagine that a lot of these people were just subscribers to your newsletter or followed you on Twitter. And it's not like everyone needs to post content all of the time, but you need to like, so you're talking about these people like who you emailed in December and they're like, yeah, we don't need a project yet. But like now you're in their head as like someone who like, you're in their head. And it's like over the course of the next 24 months, might they need research? And might they actually be curious to get something done quickly? So it's like you just need to also continue to exist in people's minds in some capacity, automatic.
And we have a newsletter that we send for Activate every month. And then we also do like free research. So basically like call it like 2-3 months. I'm trying to do it more than every quarter now. Because they work so well, is just we create like a free report on a topic that a lot of people care about. And then we just give that out for free. But that's like a great way to give people who are like on the fence, because we can't ship. So this is one problem with the business, which like, I think like, well, it's not a problem, but it's just like a nature of the business. Like some people do a great job on LinkedIn and Twitter of being like, posting screenshots of like, look at all the money we saved, like our client, like we saved $92,000 for them or whatever. Like, I wish we could do that. But every single project we do is under NDA. So it's like, I can't share like, hey, here's the report we did for Kimberly Clark, or like, here's the report we did for Estee Lauder. Like, I'd love to be able to be like, this is the topic we researched for them, because then I could go to their competitors and be like, hey, your competitor is looking for like this thing. Maybe you should do that too. But I can't do that. Right. So, the free reports give us something to give them as like an example. And it's like, this is the kind of thing you can get. But it also, to your point about staying top of mind, it's a great way to stay top of mind, because that report is probably going to get passed around the company a little bit. And
there's like the 3 guys who also are all interested in nuclear right now. And there's a little like nuclear employee resource interest group or whatever.
And it's exactly that. So then they'll pass it around. And then when they have a need, it might be 2 months from now, 3 months from now. It's like, oh yeah, who had done that report like 3 months ago? Like we should talk to that company. And the stuff comes back around. So, yeah. And to your point, like podcasts are also, I think another, so it's like posting content in different channels, but it's also like, it's almost like creating this like net
clone
or like, yeah, but it's all these different like channels that people can get to like be exposed to you to remind them that you exist and that your company exists.
Yeah. And on the flip side, it's like you need to be doing the same thing long enough for good things to happen to you. It's like
That's a great point too. Yeah. Cause if you're bouncing around for so long, then, or you're not sticking with a project for too long, then it's like, what is that person even doing? You have no idea.
So then no one's going to come to you for stuff.
I've actually, by the way, noticed about the book too. It's like the book never, and I don't think ever will. It's a too niche of a topic. It was not like a book that's selling 10,000 copies, 20,000 copies. It's sold like 3,500 copies so far. But like anybody who's buying that book is actually probably a good target customer. So it's
or a super fan.
So it's one of those, right. It's like one of those kinds of things where I found like the customer we signed last week, for example, like I talked to them for the first time in that December conversation I was telling you about. After that conversation, they like, I guess looked me up and like, I guess they connected on LinkedIn or something, ended up buying the book. I met with them in person because they're not far from where I am in January. And the guy I went to their office and the guy had my book like on the shelf. I didn't know he had done that. And then he had all these like, sticky notes in there. Like he definitely read the book and was like asking me questions from it. And like the book did all the selling. Like I feel like I didn't have to sell after that. Like the difference between the first conversation and post him reading the book conversation was like, it's not that it was night and day. He was already like, call it like a lukewarm buyer. But he went from lukewarm to basically being sold already. Like the conversation in person was just about like the specifics. Like the dollars and the timeline and all that stuff, but not really about like, should they work with us? But he's already convinced. So to your point about like putting out content and stuff, that is actually doing selling for you without you being on the phone, which is really cool.
Yeah. I, to the conversation we were having at the very beginning, of the recording in terms of like being a podcast host, I used to think of it as like very selfishly, right? These are people like kind of you're talking about, like these are people who I just want to participate in the conversation. It's very one-sided, watching them, reading them, whatever. And like, I want to be a participant in the game. And so my goal is like, okay, how do I not be like extrative? How does this like also a benefit to that? And so like, okay, so I need to build an audience such that this is also useful for that other person. But early on, I realized that's just not the case because of the exact same thing we talked about. Like the pitch to someone is like, you're going to spend an hour explaining all of the most common beginner questions to the thing that you do. Half the time when you take a meeting, someone's going to Google you before that meeting. My podcast is going to come up in the first 5 results on Google and they're going to listen to it completely. Then you're going to come into this meeting with someone who knows all of your stuff and is like so prepared for you. Like that's the thing that like helped me overcome like the obstacle of like pitching people. Cause I'm like, not that I'm like, oh, I'm doing you a favor, but like I am doing something genuinely useful for you. It's like your prospects are going to come to these meetings and you're not going to have to tell the story of like, I was a freshman in college and then I did this, then I did this, then I did this, then this happened, then this happened, and now we're here. It's like, you skip all that. Your meetings just start straight sauce. Like nothing else. No wasted time. No fluff.
It's funny because when I had Eric Jorgensen on Outside the System, he was like, I think this was on the, like this part of the episode, not just the pre-show banter, where he was like, yeah, I always say yes. Cause I was very new. Like that show was super new at that time. It was maybe, I think he's like episode 4 or 5 or something. It's like pretty early. And he's like, yeah, I always say yes to podcast interviews. Cause it's like, I spend 1 hour on a call and the episode could be listened to, thousands of times, decades in the future, or hundreds of years in the future. I'm like, yeah, man, if people are listening to my podcast hundreds of years in the future, like, I don't know if that's going to happen, but the point he was trying to make was like from a leverage perspective, it's like he spends 1 hour of his time and now like potentially a lot of people can listen to him during that time and then are like, it's like doing work for him while he's not actively, like he did the work one time and the conversation can repeat infinitely.
Yeah, I've learned so much from Eric. Just like
same,
just like being in his universe in any respect.
I mean, to your point there about like what you were saying a second ago about kind of only focusing on one person or a couple people at a time and like learning from them. Eric is definitely up there for me. Like, I feel like so many of the things he's talked about, I've used in Activate and in other things in my life. And it's just, yeah, he's been awesome.
Yeah. There have been times where I've said on the show, like, actually, like, if you just never listen to my podcast again and just instead reinvest all the time into rereading Eric's book 10 times, I'd actually not be upset. Like, again, I started this to help people, and that could potentially genuinely be more helpful than listening to the show. It's just like read the Naval Almanac and like literally take it to heart. That's actually the last question I want to end with. One of your podcasts, Made You Think, is like a really in-depth book podcast, and to really mansplain it and not capture a lot of nuance, book podcast. For someone like in terms of practical, because you've talked about a lot of stuff like Beginning of Infinity and like these absolute monster books that are like super deep and esoteric. What was like the most practical, beneficial book to your career as an entrepreneur that you've covered on the show?
Probably Eric's book is up there. The Almanac, or Navalmanac, that's what we call it. Yeah, another one was The Goal. The Goal, like GOAL. It was pretty early on, but basically it was about like where the roadblocks are in a system, particularly a company, right? So like, and it's told in like a story, not like, it's not like a business book. It's told as like a fiction book, but it demonstrates business concepts. Sure. You know what? We've done like 91 episodes now, and I like forget what all the other books are.
Barbell memory. There we go. So I'm just going to use it again. We got there.
But those are definitely like two that come to mind. Like definitely Eric's book is probably a like super high on the list. And then anything beyond that is probably, you know, probably secondary. Like, but Eric's book has been super influential on me because I'm not naturally good at thinking that way. And the funny thing is Eric said when I talked to him on the podcast, like he also is not very good at thinking this way. So it's funny because Nat is, I think, very naturally a leverage oriented thinker. You know, he always says it's because he's lazy, right? It's like he just doesn't want to do the work, so he always looks for like shortcuts. And Eric and I'm definitely this way, and I think Eric is this way too, and a lot of people are. I think, you know, you find that it's easy to brute force something. You're like, I can just do it. You know, I can spend the 3 hours to go build a list or whatever, 4 hours, you know, whatever it is to go actually do this thing, instead of being smart about it, like finding the shortcut. And so I think like Eric says that like he got really deep in this topic because he wanted to get better at it himself, and it just kind of led him down this rabbit hole. And that's why that's why I think his book was so influential on me too, because it's like even as he was as I was reading the book and as he was talking about it, it's just like all the things he was saying were resonating with me because I kind of started in the same place where it's like my instinct was not to work smart. It was just to like work hard, which I think is probably a lot of people's problem.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite pieces of this podcast, Meta, is, you know, I interviewed Eric in like September of 2020 or October, whatever, roughly that time frame. And then like that book came out, obviously made a huge splash. And then there are people who read it, implemented it, that I interviewed a year later. And I'm like, what was the thing of your story? And they're like, well, I read this book and I implemented it, and like, look where I am now. It's, there's so many people that have like their full cycle of like finding a life-changing piece of information, acting on it, and then now having like a super fascinating story can like trace back to the work of like other past guests, which is like super, super cool to see. So like to some extent, that's like also true of you.
Yeah, that there's this like web of connections almost.
Exactly.
One other book that I should mention, even though I don't know about the author so much anymore, but he's still a very brilliant guy.
Is it Taleb?
It's Anti-Fragile.
Yeah.
Yeah, Anti-Fragile is, I try to separate the ideas from the man. And the book is still very, you know, has been very influential on me. And I kind of think about it a lot where it's, you know, how fragile, especially like even from a business perspective, personal and business, but business especially, where it's like, how fragile is my company? You know, when we had one customer, it was like super fragile, and two customers, slightly less fragile, like 10, 11, 12, like the more you get, the slightly less fragile it is. But then there's fragility you think about for other areas of your company as well. Like, are all of your leads coming from one channel? And, you know, if something happened to that channel or a cost changed, like, are you...
I've been through that.
Yep.
So
yeah. What is that story, if you don't mind sharing?
Just working in crypto.
Yeah.
During
Yeah,
a bull
oh, yeah.
market.
Yeah.
So, and then working in crypto in a bear market. So it's like, oh, everyone's talking about Twitter and crypto on Twitter all day, every day. And it's like, oh, just kidding. And like also some key person risk as well. So
yeah, exactly. So that book I think is pretty useful too. Would not recommend following Taleb on Twitter though, for your own sanity.
Fair enough. Well, Neil, there's a million other things we could get into, and I'm happy to chat whenever, just whether it's a podcast or not, just to keep the conversation rolling. I think there's a lot I'd love to continue discussing with you. What's the best start here place for you on the internet for anyone who's listened to this?
I need to be better about that, but Twitter is probably the best place. The Rail Neil S. Been trying to get my handle Neil Soni, but Twitter hasn't released it yet. That person hasn't logged in years. I hope to get Neil Soni someday, but the Rail Neil S right now. I'm sure you'll link to it in the show notes. And then people can reach out to me too. I know some people don't like getting cold emails, but I actually enjoy it. I feel like I've met some really cool people over the years through just them reaching out on my website. So my website's neilsoni.com. And then my email is on there. So it's pretty easy to get a hold of me.
Amazing. Well, this has been a blast. Also check out the podcasts that Neil has. And yeah, Neil, this has been a blast. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This is super fun.